Chapter 2 of Galactic Patrol by E. Smith. Chapter 2. Barely a month after his graduation, even before he had entirely completed the postgraduate tours of duty mentioned by von Hohendorf, Kinnison was summoned to Prime Base by no less a personage than Port Admiral Haines himself. There, in the Admiral's private aero, whose flaring lights cleared a path as though by magic, through the swarming traffic, the novice and the veteran flew slowly over the vast establishment of the base. Shops and factories, city-like barracks, landing fields stretched beyond the far horizon. Flying craft ranging from tiny one-man helicopters, through small and large scouts, patrol ships and cruisers, up to the immense globular super-dreadnoughts of space. All these were observed and commented upon. Finally, the Arrow landed beside a long, comparatively low building, a structure heavily guarded, inside the base although it was, within which Kinnison saw a thing that fairly snatched away his breath. A spaceship it was, but what a ship! In bulk it was vastly larger even than the super-dreadnoughts of the patrol, but unlike them it was, in shape, a perfect teardrop, streamlined to the ultimate possible degree. "What do you think of her?" the Port Admiral asked. "Think of her?" The young officer gulped twice before he attained coherence. "I can't put it in words, sir, but some day if I live long enough and develop enough force, I hope to command a ship like that." "Sooner than you think, Kinnison," Haines told him flatly. "You are in command of her beginning tomorrow morning." "Huh? Me?" Kinnison exclaimed, but sobered quickly. "Oh, I see, sir. It takes 10 years of proved accomplishment to rate command of a first-class enforcement vessel, and I have no rating at all. You've already intimated that this ship is experimental. There is, then, something about her that is new and untried, and so dangerous that you do not want to risk an experienced commander in her. I am to give her a workout, and if I can bring her back in one piece, I turn her over to a real captain. But that's all right with me, Admiral. Thanks a lot for picking me out. What a chance! What a chance!" Kinnison's eye gleamed at the prospect of even a brief command of such a creation. "Right and wrong," the old Admiral made surprising answer. "It is true that she's new, untried, and dangerous. So much so that we are unwilling to give her to any of our present captains. No, she's not really new either. Rather, her basic idea is so old that it has been abandoned for centuries. She uses explosives, of a type that cannot be tried out fully except in actual combat. Her primary weapon is what we have called the Q-gun. The propellant is heptodetonite. The shell carries a charge of 20 metric tons of duodecaflatalamate." "But, sir," Kinnison began. "Just a minute. I'll go into that later. While your premises were correct, your conclusion is not. You graduated number 1, and in every respect save experience, you are as well qualified to command as is any captain of the fleet. And since the Britannia is such a radical departure from any conventional type, battle experience is not a prerequisite. Therefore, if she holds together through one engagement, she's yours for good. In other words, to make up for the possibility of having yourself scattered all over space, you have a chance to win that 10 years rating you mentioned a minute ago, all in one trip. Fair enough?" "Fair? It's fine. Wonderful. And thanks, never mind the thanks until you get back. You were about to comment, I believe, upon the impossibility of using explosives against a free opponent." "It can't be impossible, of course, since the Britannia's been built. I just don't quite see how it could have been made effective. You lock to the pirate retractors, screen to screen, decks about 10 kilometers. You blast a hole through his screens to his wall shield. The muzzle of the Q-gun mounts an annular multiplex projector, which puts out a Q-type tube of force. Q47 SM9 to be exact. As you can see from the type formula, this helix extends the gun barrel from ship to ship and confines the propellant gases behind the projectile where they belong. When the shell strikes the wall shield of the pirate and detonates, something will have to give way. The tube and tractors, being pure force and computed for this particular combination of explosives, will hold, and our physicists have calculated that the 10-kilometer column of inert propellant gases will offer so much inertia and resistance that any possible wall shield will have to go down. That is the point that cannot be tried out experimentally. It is quite within the bounds of possibility that the pirates may have been able to develop wall screens as powerful as our Q-type helices. It should not be necessary to point out to you that if they have been able to develop a wall shield that will stand up under detonating duodecaflatalamate, the backblast through the breech of the Q-gun will blow the Britannia apart as though she were made of matchwood. That is only one of the chances, and perhaps not the greatest one, that you and your crew will have to take. They are all volunteers, by the way, and will get plenty of extra rating if they come through alive. Do you want the job? You don't have to ask me that, Chief. You know I want it. Of course, but I had to go through the formality of asking sometime. But to get on with the discussion, this pirate situation is entirely out of control, as you already know. We don't even know whether Boskonia is a reality, a figurehead, a symbol, or simply a figment of somebody's imagination. But whoever or whatever Boskonia really is, some being or some group of beings has perfected a mighty efficient organization of outlaws. So efficient that we haven't been able to locate their main base. You may as well know now a fact that is not yet public property, that even convoyed vessels are no longer safe. The pirates have developed ships of a new and extraordinary type, ships that are much faster than our heavy battleships, and yet vastly more heavily armed than our fast cruisers. Thus, they can outfight any enforcement vessel that can catch them, and can outrun anything of ours armed heavily enough to stand up against their beams. That accounts for the recent heavy losses, Kinnison mused. Yes, Haines went on grimly. Ship after ship of our best has been blasted out of the ether, doomed before it pointed a beam, and more will be. We cannot force an engagement on our terms. We must fight on theirs. That is the present intolerable situation. We must learn what the pirates' new power system is. Our scientists say that it may be anything, from cosmic energy receptors and converters down to a controlled space warp, whatever that may be. Anyway, they haven't been able to duplicate it, so it is up to us to find out what it is. The Britannia is the tool our engineers have designed to get that information. She's the fastest thing in space, developing at full blast an inert acceleration of 10 gravities. Figure out for yourself what velocity that means free in open space. You've just said that we can't have everything in one ship, Kinnison said thoughtfully. What did they sacrifice to get that speed? All the conventional offensive armament, Haines replied frankly. She has no long-range beams at all, and only enough short-range stuff to help drive the Q-helix through the enemy's screens. Practically, her only offense is the Q-gun. But she has plenty of defensive screens, she has speed enough to catch anything afloat, and she has the Q-gun, which we hope will be enough. Now we'll go over the general plan of action. The engineers will go into all the technical details with you during a test flight that will last as long as you like. When you and your crew are thoroughly familiar with every phase of her operation, bring the engineers back here to base and go out on patrol. Somewhere in the galaxy you will find a pirate vessel of the new type. You lock onto him, as I said before. You attach the Q-gun well forward, being sure that the point of attachment is far enough away from the power rooms so that the essential mechanisms will not be destroyed. You board and storm, another revival of the technique of older times. Specialists in your crew, who will have done nothing much up to that time, will then find out what our scientists want to know. If at all possible, they will send it in instantly via tight beam communicator. If, because of distance or for any other reason, it should be impossible for them to communicate, the whole thing's again up to you. The port admiral paused, his eyes boring into those of the younger man, then went on impressively. That information must get back to base. If it does not, the Britannia is a failure. We will be right back where we started from. The slaughter of our men and the destruction of our ships will continue unchecked. As to how you are to do it, we cannot give you even general instructions. All I can say is that you have the most important assignment in the universe today. And repeat, that information must get back to base. Now come aboard and meet your crew and the engineers. Under the expert tutelage of the designers and builders of the Britannia, Vice Commander Kinnison drove her hither and thither through the trackless wastes of the galaxy. Inert and free, under every possible degree of power, he maneuvered her, attacking imaginary foes and actual meteorites with equal zeal. Maneuvered and attacked until he and his ship were one, until he reacted automatically to her slightest demand, until he and every man of his eager and highly trained crew knew to the final volt and to the ultimate ampere her gargantuan capacity both to give it and to take it. Then and only then did he return to base, unload the engineers, and set out upon the quest. Trail after trail he followed, but all were cold. Alarm after alarm he answered, but always he arrived too late, arrived to find gutted merchantmen and riddled enforcement vessel, with no life in either and with nothing to indicate in which direction the marauders might have gone. Finally, however, "QBT! Calling QBT!" The Britannia's code call blared from the sealed band speaker, and a string of numbers followed, the spatial coordinates of the luckless vessel's position. Chief Pilot Henry Henderson punched the figures upon his locator, and in the tank, the enormous, minutely cubed model of the galaxy, there appeared a redly brilliant point of light. Kinnison rocketed out of his narrow bunk, digging the sleep out of his eyes, and shot himself into place beside the pilot. "Right in our laps," he exulted. "Scarcely 10 light years away. Start scrambling the ether." And as the vengeful cruiser darted toward the scene of depredation, all space became filled with blast after blast of static interference, through which, it was hoped, the pirate could not summon the help he was so soon to need. But that howling static gave the pirate commander pause. Surely this was something new. Before him lay a richly laden freighter, its 2 convoying enforcement ships already practically hors de combat. A few more minutes and the prize would be his. Nevertheless, he darted away, swept the ether with his detectors, saw the Britannia, and turned in headlong flight. For if this stream-laden freighter was sufficiently convinced of its prowess to try and blanket the ether against him, that information was something that Boskoni would value far above 1 shipload of material wealth. But the pirate craft was now upon the visiplates of the Britannia, and entirely ignoring the crippled spaceships, Henderson flung his vessel after the other, manipulating his incredibly complex controls purely by touch, the while staring into his plate not only with his eyes, but with every fibre of his being as well. He hurled his huge mount hither and thither in frantic leaps. After what seemed an age, he snapped down a toggle switch and relaxed long enough to grin at Kinnison. "Holding him?" the young commander demanded. "Got him, skipper," the pirate replied positively. "It was touch and go for 90 seconds, but I've got a CRX tracer on him now at full pull. He can't put out enough jets to get away from that. I can hold him forever." "Fine work, Hen." Kinnison strapped himself into his seat and donned his headset. "General call. Attention. Battle stations. By stations, report. Station 1, tractor beams, hot. Station 2, repellers, hot. Station 3, projector 1, hot." Thus, station after station of the warship of the void reported until "Station 58, the Q gun, hot." Kinnison himself reported, then gave to the pilot the words which throughout the spaceways of the galaxy had come to mean complete readiness to face any emergency. "Hot and tight, Hen. Let's take 'em." The pilot shoved his blast lever, already almost at maximum, clear out against its stop, and hunched himself even more intently over his instruments. As moved his pointer, so varied the direction of the thrust that was driving the Britannia toward the enemy, at the unimaginable velocity of 90 parsecs an hour, a velocity possible only to inertialess matter being urged through an almost perfect vacuum by a driving blast capable of lifting the stupendous normal tonnage of the immense sky rover against a gravity 10 times that of her native Earth. Unimaginable, completely so. The ship of the Galactic Patrol was hurling herself through space, at a pace in comparison with which any speed that the mind can grasp would be the merest crawl, a pace to make light itself seem stationary. Ordinary vision would have been useless, but the observers of that day used no antiquated optical system. Their detector beams, converted into light only at their plates, were heterodyned upon and were carried by sub-ethereal ultrawaves, vibrations residing far below the level of the ether, and thus possessing a velocity and a range infinitely greater than those of any possible ether-borne wave. Although stars moved across the visiplates in flaming zigzag lines of light, as pursued and pursuer passed system after solar system, in fantastic light-years-long hops, yet Henderson kept his cruiser upon the pirate's tail, and steadily cut down the distance between them. Soon a tractor beam licked out from the patrol ship, touched the fleeing marauder lightly, and the two spaceships flashed toward each other. Nor was the enemy unprepared for combat. One of the crack raiders of Boskoni, master pirate of the known universe, she'd never before found difficulty in conquering any vessel fleet enough to catch her. Therefore her commander made no attempt to cut the beam, or rather, since the two inertialess vessels flashed together to repel her zone contact in such a minute fraction of a second, that any human action within that time was impossible. It would be more correct to say that the pirate captain changed his tactics instantly from those of flight to those of combat. He thrust out tractor beams of his own, and from the already white-hot refractory throats of his projectors there raved out horribly potent beams of annihilation, beams of dreadful power which tore madly at the straining defensive screens of the patrol ship. Screens flared vividly, radiating all the colors of the spectrum. Space itself seemed a rainbow gone mad, for there were being exerted there forces of a magnitude to stagger the imagination, forces to be yielded only by the atomic might from which they sprang, forces whose neutralization set up visible strains in the very fabric of the ether itself. The young commander, seated at his conning plate, clenched his fists and swore a startled deep space oath, as his eyes swept over the delicately accurate meters and gauges before him. For under the frightful impact of that instantaneously launched attack, his outer screen was already down and his second was beginning to crack. "We'll have to scrap the regulation battle plan," he barked into his microphone. "Open all motors to absolute top. Cut all resistance out of number 3 circuit. Dalhousie, cut all repellers. Bring us right up into their zone. All you beamers, concentrate on Area K. Break down those screens!" Kinnison was hunched rigidly over his panel. His voice came grittily through locked teeth. "Cut all your resistors if you have to. The motors and accumulators will hold long enough. There, that's better. Our third is up again, and theirs is going down. Come on, boys, burn 'em down. Give 'em everything you can. Put through the bare bus bars. No matter what it takes. Get through that wall shield, so I can use this Q gun." Little by little, under the stupendous force of the Britannia's attack, the defenses of the enemy began to fail, and Kinnison's hands flew over his controls. A port opened in the patrol ship's armored side, and an ugly snout protruded, the projector-ringed muzzle of a squat, monstrous cannon. From its projector bands there leaped out, with the velocity of light, a tube of quasi-solid force, which was, in effect, the continuation of the rifle's grim barrel. A tube which crashed through the weakened third screen of the enemy with a space-racking shock, and struck savagely, with writhing, twisting thrusts at the second. Aided by the mass concentration of the Britannia's every battery of short-range beams, it went through, and through the first. Now it struck the very wall shield of the outlaw, that impregnable screen which, designed to bear the brunt of any possible inert collision, had never been pierced or ruptured by any material substance, however applied. To this inner defense the immaterial gun barrel clung. Simultaneously the tractor beams, hitherto exerting only a few dynes of force, stiffened into unbreakable, inflexible rods of energy, binding the two ships of space into one rigid system, each relative to the other immovable. Then Kinnison's flying fingertip touched a button, and the Q-gun spoke. From its sullen throat there erupted a huge torpedo. Slowly the giant projectile crept along, watched in awe and amazement by the officers of both vessels. For to those space-hardened veterans the velocity of light was a veritable crawl, and here was a thing that would require 4 or 5 whole seconds to cover a mere 10 kilometers of distance. But although slow, this bomb might prove dangerous. Therefore the pirate commander threw his every resource into attempts to cut the tube of force, to blast away from the tractor beams, to explode the sluggish missile before it could reach his wall shields. In vain, for the Britannia's every beam was set to protect the torpedo and the mighty rods of energy, without whose grip the inertialess mass of the enemy vessel would offer no resistance whatever to the force of the proposed explosion. Slowly, so slowly, as the age-long seconds crawled into eternity, there extended from enforcement vessel almost to pirate wall a raging, white-hot pillar, the gases of combustion of the propellant heptodetonite, ahead of which there rushed the Q-gun's tremendous shell with its horribly destructive freight. What would happen? Could even the almost immeasurable force of that frightful charge of duodecaflatomate break down a wall shield designed to withstand the cosmic assaults of meteoric missiles? And what would happen if that wall screen held? In spite of himself, Kinnison's mind insisted upon painting the ghastly picture. The awful explosion, the pirate's screen still intact, the raving gases driven backward along the tube of force. The bare metal of the gun's breech, he knew, was not and could not be reinforced by the infinitely stronger although immaterial shields of pure energy which protected the hull. And no conceivable substance, however resistant, could impede, save momentarily, the unimaginable forces about to be unleashed. Nor would there be time to release the Q-tube after the explosion, but before the Britannia's own destruction. For if the enemy's shields stayed up for even a fraction of a second, the unthinkable pressure of the blast would propagate backward through the already densely compressed gases in the tube, would sweep away as though it were nothing the immensely thick metallic barrier of the gun breech, and would wreak within the bowels of the patrol ship a destruction even more complete than that intended for the foe. Nor were his men in better case. Each knew that this was the climactic instant of his whole existence, that life itself hung poised upon the issue of the next split second. Hurry it up! Snap into it! Will that crawling, creeping thing never strike? Some prayed briefly, some swore bitterly, but prayers and curses were alike unconscious, and had precisely the same meaning. Each man, white of face and grim of jaw, clenched his fists and waited, tense and strained, for the impact. End of chapter 2.